The daily taste of Tanya for the 7th of Adar, 31, Lamed Aleph, and it's on page Mem in the Hebrew or 142 in the English. With the Beinani, by becoming broken-hearted, frees himself of the Timtum Halev and awakens the heart and gets the heart to be responsive again. How does he become broken-hearted? He considers the nature of his animal soul. He considers the acts which are either sinful or not godly. He considers his dreams and the nature of his dreams. And then he fulfills also the statement of the sages to be humble before every person by taking into consideration the lowest of the low, who is called a Rasha because he doesn't control his Yetzer Hara out of fear of God. And he has to struggle with a very difficult battle to overcome that Yetzer Hara. So when the Beinani takes into account the fact that he doesn't struggle in the way that the lowest of the low needs to struggle, and therefore he can't judge the other person because he doesn't know if he would be any better if he were in the other person's situation. So he can't feel superior to the other person. Then he considers also the fact that where he does need to struggle, he doesn't in fact struggle, which makes him equal to the lowest of the low. They both don't struggle. And then the fact that he, being a learned man, and who knows Torah and knows mitzvahs and understands what mitzvahs are and so on, when he doesn't do what he's supposed to, he can't be equal to the lowest of the low who hangs around the street corners. He must be lower and worse. So from all of this, he will have deep sadness. The Rebbe says not to worry about this sadness because, number one, you have to use a little sadness in order to overcome the klipa. You use fire to fight fire. And secondly, the sadness is only a momentary thing. The feeling that he's left with is really a feeling of bitterness, and bitterness is holy, and it sometimes is necessary to sweeten the dinim, the severity of unholiness. And then, from this bitterness, because the bitterness is alive and it is holy, from the bitterness he comes to joy, which is the preferred holiness. How does he come to joy? By consoling himself through the following thoughts. He thinks to himself, it's all true about how lowly and how despicable and so on my life has become, but that's true only of one half of me, and that is the animal soul. But in spite of the animal soul, I have also a godly soul, and this godly soul is imprisoned within me. And the pity over the godly soul's imprisonment is so great that I should turn my attention, my whole aim and desire, to liberate the neshama from this exile and restore her to her father's house as in her youth. And that is through the performance of Torah and mitzvahs. And this is called tshuva, returning the neshama to her state of comfort, of closeness to God, and ma'asim tovim, and the good deeds that we do in order to give the neshama its freedom. And now, on Daf Mem, we will continue about 5 lines from the bottom. And this then will be the way that he will serve God all his life, with a great joy. Why is it a great joy? Simchas hanefesh. It is the joy of the neshama b'tzeisa mehaguf hamesuov, when it gains its freedom from the unholiness of the body. And it experiences a closeness to God, closeness to the Father, as it is in the example, during the davening and learning. And as the Gemara says, that there's a kind of a tshuva that we should do all our lives, all our days. This is obviously not tshuva over sins. It means the tshuva of returning the neshama to its natural state, which is a state of closeness to God, and that's through Torah and mitzvahs. And that's the tshuva that he means, that he's referring to when he says that you should be doing tshuva all your life. Now, what is the great joy? Ein lo simcha gdeilo. There is no greater joy, kitzeis mehagolus v'hashivyo, than the coming out of golus and imprisonment. In other words, it's not the average joy, it's the joy that comes after darkness, which is greater than regular joy, just as light that comes after darkness is greater than regular light. Kimoshel ben Melech, as for example, a prince, Shahoyo b'shivyo, who was taken into captivity, and he is pining in captivity. Menuvel ba'ashpo, and he is filthied with the dirt there. In other words, it's a very bad and deep captivity. He struggles there, and he gets filthy there, and so on. He's wallowing in it. And then all of a sudden, and he is suddenly set free to go back to his father, the king. So there's no greater joy than that, because of the contrast, because of the extreme change from the lowest, most undesirable condition to the highest and most desirable condition of being back with his father. So in the same way, when the godly soul experiences its freedom, when it is released from the captivity of the body and allowed to express itself and to feel a closeness to God through Torah and mitzvahs, this is not just an ordinary joy, but this is a great joy. And although the body remains in its unholy and abominable state, so the question would be, the example of the prince who comes out of imprisonment, out of captivity, he comes out of captivity completely, his body as well as his soul. But in the nimshol, when the neshama is given its freedom, it's only the neshama, but the body still remains in its despicable state. So why then is there such a great joy? It's only a half a redemption. So where does this great joy fit in? And as the Zohar says, that the body, when it is not elevated and not refined, is called a skin of a snake, the snake being the symbol of klippa, and the skin of the snake being a lesser klippa, not the snake itself, but only the clothing of the snake, because the Jewish body, it doesn't come from totally bad klippa, but from klippas noiga. So the Jewish body is called the skin of the snake, and why is it that way? Why is it still in its despicable state? Because essentially the animal soul has not been transformed into good, as it is in a tzaddik. We call it bigdusha, to become part of kedusha. This hasn't happened, and that's why the body and the animal soul remains in its unholy condition. So where is the great joy? In spite of this, Tika nafshe bi'enov, the soul is so precious and special in his eyes, lismeyach b'simchaso, that he prefers to rejoice in the joy of the godly soul, yesem mehaguf hanivzo, more than the body which he despises, which he is embarrassed by, so that he doesn't want to diminish or to interfere with the neshama's joy by bringing in the sadness or the sad condition, the misery of the body. So although the body is not yet holy and has not been refined and elevated and brought to holiness, but the godly soul is so much more significant, is so much more precious, that he has no time and can't be bothered by the sadness of the animal soul, or the sad state of the animal soul, when he has a godly soul with which to rejoice. This condition, this experience of abandoning the misery of the animal soul and preferring the joy of the godly soul when it experiences its freedom, this is Yitzias Mitzrayim, spiritual Yitzias Mitzrayim. Shenemar bo, because concerning the coming out of Egypt it says, Ki borach ha'am, that the people fled. Pare was told after the Jews had left and had gone out into the desert, the deal had been that they would stay out for 3 days and then come back. But when after the 3 days the Jews did not come back, Pare was notified that the people, the nation, had fled. So at first glance this seems strange. Why was it necessary to be this way? Is it not true that if they had told Pare that they are leaving forever, and that he should set them free forever, would he not have been forced to let them go? He had already been defeated by the 10 plagues. And so he no longer had control over them. So why did they have to run away? Hello, so we must say that it's mipnei shahara shebenafshish Yisrael, because the evil that was in the Jewish souls themselves, it wasn't a problem with Pare, but it was a problem within the Jew. That the evil, the unholiness of Mitzrayim was still in the Jew. It was still strong in the left side of the heart within the Jews, because we're told that this unholiness of Egypt, of Mitzrayim, was not removed, did not end until the giving of the Torah. Which means that it wasn't until they had counted Svira, the 49 days between the Yitzias Mitzrayim and the giving of the Torah, and each one of those 49 days, and then the 50th day, which was the day of Matan Torah, each day represented one aspect of the neshama that was refined and made holy by the counting of the Omer. Whereas when they left Mitzrayim, it was a sudden thing. God appeared and took them out with a strong arm. In other words, literally forced them out of Golus, because when they were in Mitzrayim, they hadn't yet worked on themselves to make themselves holy. It was that the Eibishter came. God came and revealed himself, and that godliness overpowered them and made them leave Egypt. So it wasn't until Matan Torah, after Sviras HaEmer, that they had become purified. Why then did they leave Egypt? Rak magmosam v'cheftzam hoiso. Their desire and their goal was lotzeis nafsham ha'likis megolus hasitra achra, to take their godly soul out of the exile, which was the klippa hitumas Mitzrayim, and in that case it was the tumah of Mitzrayim, uledovka beyizbarech, and to allow the neshama to cleave to God. So it's not that they were through and finished with the unholiness of Mitzrayim. It's not that their body and their animal soul had outgrown or transcended the unholiness. On the contrary, they were still very stuck in Mitzrayim as far as the body was concerned. But the godly soul was ready for a change, and so they fled from Mitzrayim. They ran to godliness even though they weren't ready themselves. And that's the idea of fleeing. Fleeing means when the enemy is still very much alive and still very much threatening, because you're still vulnerable, but you run away because there is something else out there that you want even more. So even the body of the Jews came out of Mitzrayim. It wasn't that the neshama left Mitzrayim and the body stayed. The body also came out, but it wasn't that the body was ready. The body came out following the neshama, because it was overwhelmed by the neshama's inspiration. But the body itself didn't become purified until 50 days later. And that is the experience of Yetzias Mitzrayim. Ukedechsiv, and as we find verses in Torah that describe this condition, as it says, Hashem uzi umanusi b'yem tzara, God is my strength and my refuge in a time of tzara, in a time of pain. And that implies a hiding place, a refuge, where you have to run away from an enemy and take refuge. It also says, Mizgabi umanusi, or the third verse, V'humanisli, all of them implying an escape and a refuge. And that's why when Mashiach comes, and all Tumah will be removed from the world, and will go out of this Golus, Ksiv, it says concerning that redemption, that Geula, that we will not go in haste, because God, it will go before us. Unlike Yetzias Mitzrayim, there won't be any tumah to run away from. Even the body, even the animal soul, will have been elevated and purified to where it too is ready to go out of Golus. And that's also why, after Yetzias Mitzrayim, there was another Golus. There was the Churban of the first Bayis, the second Bayis, and so on, and we're still in Golus. And that's because we left Egypt only in favor of the godly soul, but not because the animal soul had gotten ready. Whereas when Mashiach comes, there will be no Golus after this Geula, because nothing will be left in Golus, not even the animal soul. So this is the consolation that the Beinoni takes to heart, that although it's all true without a doubt, that the body, the animal soul is despicable and so on, but that's only true of the animal half. But the godly half deserves attention more than the animal, and therefore if I can give it freedom and I can give it release from its imprisonment, I put all my energy into that, and that is a happy event. That's an occasion for joy, and therefore I end up being happy, and a great happiness, in spite of the fact that I also have cause or reason to be unhappy. The Rebbe then continues to give us another consolation, a deeper, greater consolation, in that there is an aspect in which the animal soul is included and does get elevated and does eventually become itself a cause for joy, but more about that tomorrow. In the Hayom Yom, in the Chassidish calendar, for the 7th day of Adar Aleph, the Rebbe writes that every Jew needs to know that he is a messenger, a shliach, from the master of all creation, from God, in order to bring about, to actualize in every place in which he finds himself, God's will and intention in the creation of the world, which was to illuminate the world with the light of Torah and Avodah. And this is done al yidei, through the performance of actual mitzvahs and ingraining in ourselves good character traits, midos teves. When the Rebbe says that every Jew needs to know that he is a shliach, this brings to mind the Rebbe's urgent request and instruction that every home, every Jewish home, should become a Chabad house, because every Jew is a shliach, and therefore his house is a center for Yiddishkeit, for Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim, so that by establishing his house as a resource place, as a center where people come for the purpose of learning something, or saying Tillim and davening, or giving tzedakah, or doing other mitzvahs, this is the way in which we illuminate the world with the light of Torah and Avodah. And particularly, the Rebbe's request that every child even a very young child, should have a pushka in the house with their name on it. Each child their own pushka. And from the way it seems, the Rebbe wants the adults to have it as well. Only the adult, it goes without saying, needs to have a pushka because he's obligated in the mitzvah of tzedakah. And that's why the Rebbe emphasized that even a child should have it. But this is an important project that the Rebbe is urging very strongly for everyone, every Jew, everywhere, that there should be a pushka in the house for each member of the house with their name on it, so that they have the schus of the great mitzvah of tzedakah that hastens the coming of Mashiach. In addition to the pushka, every child should have also a chumash and a siddur with their name on it, which covers all three pillars on which the world rests: Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim.